recent upsurge in UFO activity and awareness is uncharacteristic for our government based on past events. However, there are a great many examples of very credible people reporting unexplained objects in the skies above us all. Here, we would like to share some rare vintage reports culled from archival media repositories.
It was a perfect shape. It was shaped sort of well, like a pearl with a tail. And I watched this thing, and suddenly it disappeared. And I thought, well, am I seeing things? I'd had a very grueling flight. I'd had engine trouble, and I'd been waiting for hours, expecting to go into the sea, you know. However, suddenly this thing reappeared, coming towards me. And I thought, well, I'm not going to let it go this time. And I kept my look fixed on it. And it was approaching fairly fast, and then suddenly, gradually rather, it began to thin out, and it vanished in front of me, and before my eyes. It became a sort of ghost. I could see the water, the waves of the sea through it for one instant, and then it vanished.
In France, like America, the flying saucer mystery makes headlines. A young Frenchman photographed this flying saucer, or is it, from a mountainside in central France. Military officials, suspecting that the object was a meteorological balloon, send one aloft and photograph it. But comparison shows a striking contrast, and puzzled officials wonder, what was it? In Washington, ghost-like objects dart across the radar screen at the CAA Traffic Control Center at National Airport for several hours, traveling more than 100 miles an hour. Air Force jet fighters spend several hours chasing the objects plotted on the radar scope. General Sanford, Air Force Intelligence Director, confirms that the objects are not secret American weapons and reiterates the Air Force's obligation to investigate.
In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them, explain them to our own satisfaction. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
On the day of the eclipse of the sun, some of the crew and passengers of a BOAC Stratocruiser reported seeing mysterious objects in the sky over the Atlantic. When the airliner arrived back in Britain, the pilot, Captain James Howard, was asked to describe these objects by our reporter, Peter Maggs.
Well, very conveniently, Captain, we've got a nice blackboard here. Do you think you could illustrate this phenomenon for us? Could you show us what it looked like, very roughly?
I'll try. When I look out of the left-hand window of the nose of a Stratocruiser, I see something like this. Well, that is the port wing. One of the engines is there. And on this occasion, the horizon was at about that level, with low clouds way beneath us. The sun had just set over here, and these objects appeared something like this. The large object appeared at times to be something like that, with the smaller objects in relation to it something like this. They were sometimes ahead of it, sometimes behind, and the shape of this object was continually changing. Sometimes one end would appear to disappear, sometimes this was very much larger, sometimes it was almost a V-shaped affair, like this. It was always black in silhouette, and always quite a clear edge to it.
And when it finally disappeared, it seemed to dissolve.
Yes, the smaller ones just disappeared first, And this just shrunk down until it was no more than just a speck, and then that disappeared.
Now, would you say that it's possible some sort of optical illusion, or would you say it was an intelligently navigated craft?
At least 10 of us, the entire crew and some of the passengers, watched this object for 18 minutes. And it maintained station alongside us, some distance away. And I think there's no question that it was no illusion and that it was being intelligently handled.
We were en route to Goose Bay in Labrador, flying at our assigned altitude of 19,000 feet. It was a lovely summer evening. I was looking down on the left-hand side of the airplane, and I saw through broken cloud something moving alongside us. There were 7 in all objects. There was one large one and 6 smaller ones. The big one also appeared to be changing its shape gradually, and it stayed with us, and the passengers became interested naturally, and in fact everybody was agog.
I looked out the window and observed this light moving at a very excessive speed, in excess of 600 knots, coming at the helicopter. It looked like a locked-on missile.
A family of 5 in a car observed the strange red object on a collision course with Colonel Coyne's helicopter. They pulled off the road to watch.
The thing that makes this particular evening a unique experience was that it was almost a mid-air collision with an object that we, or you know, as a UFO. We did not know it was such until it was on top of the helicopter, and that took just a matter of minutes.
Colonel Coyne put the helicopter into a dive to try to avoid impact. When he and his crew looked up, the object was keeping pace with them.
While it was in this position, the green light came out from the undercarriage of the UFO.
Colonel Coyne cut the power and set the controls for a steep dive. In spite of this, the helicopter was pulled upward toward the UFO from an altitude of 1,700 feet to an altitude of above 3,700 feet. Colonel Coyne and his crew observed the strange UFO at close range for approximately 2 minutes.
The object that I viewed that particular evening had a high degree of technology. It was composed of a structure and a design that we do not have. The object can move through the atmosphere without causing any turbulence. It can move at high speeds below 10,000 feet. There are no vertical or horizontal stabilizers, no landing gear, no source of propulsion reflected on the craft. Looks like it could fly in space.
This is Major Coyne, Army helicopter pilot. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Arrigo Jetsi, Air Medic Sergeant Healy, and Robert Janacek. These men had just finished their annual flight physical early that day and were found fit and sound of mind. They would take off from Port Columbus Airport about 10:30 p.m. But what was about to follow, and the subsequent report they filed, would put to the test the credibility of these men.
Approximately 8 miles east of Mansfield, our crew chief, Sergeant Robert Janacek, observed a red light on the east horizon.
Did you gentlemen see the same red light?
Yes, I did. Our helicopter was flying on a northerly heading. We were flying at an altitude of 2,500 feet. He indicated that the light seemed to be pacing the helicopter, moving along in a parallel direction with our aircraft.
Which direction from the helicopter was the other?
Moving, it was to our right, to the right side of the helicopter. And it was moving with us as we were heading north towards Cleveland. And at this time, he indicated that the light changed its direction, was coming directly at the helicopter at the same altitude. And as the helicopter was maintaining a speed of 90 knots, the object came at a terrific speed from the horizon. We estimated 15 miles. Visibility was reported 15 miles that night.
Did you gentlemen see the object at this time, after it had been pointed out by the sergeant?
No, not at that time. I was flying left seat or co-pilot, and visibility from that seat from an object approaching from the right is rather limited. So I was having difficulty seeing the object. and it was for that reason that Major Coyne did take the aircraft or the controls from me.
I grabbed the controls from Lieutenant Jetsey because I thought it was going to hit us. I braced for impact. With that, I pushed the collective down to get the helicopter to start to descend. I then looked at the altimeter. It was showing 1,700 feet, and we were descending 1,000 feet a minute. The helicopter began to descend, and as this object came at the helicopter, it seemed to descend with the helicopter. When the helicopter went down, the object came down, but it still came directly at our broadside, as if to hit the helicopter from the right side.
Did anyone else see the object at this time?
Yes, I was watching it come on out of the east horizon, and the only thing I felt was when the skipper took over the controls and we started to auto-rotate down, and I'd never been involved in a mid-air collision, so I was just watching this thing come at us. It was at this time a light came, swung 90 degrees from the UFO towards the helicopter, and it came in through the front of the plexiglass, and the entire cabin inside turned green from the light. It was a pyramid-shaped type light that beamed down and came through the front of the helicopter.
How long was your aircraft bathed in this beam?
The light that came into the cockpit apparently lasted only for a few seconds, but it was enough time that I observed the red instrument panel lights utilized for night flying to be absorbed by the green light.
Was it possible for you to determine the outline of this object against the star background?
Yes, sir. It was a cigar-shaped object, like a symmetrical airfoil with the dome on it. It was a solid object. It was a metallic structure to it. And you could see lights reflecting off the structure, and you could not see any of the stars or behind the object itself.
Well, while all this was going on, what was the attitude of the helicopter?
Apparently, when we were supposed to be descending at 2,000 feet a minute at 100 knots, we were climbing at 1,000 feet a minute with the controls still established for a descent. And we went from 1,700 feet up to 3,500 feet and topped out at 3,800 feet. I would like to stress one important fact, and that is there is approximately 20 years of Army aviation experience between the 4 men on board the helicopter that night. We have been trained to follow procedures and regulations in reporting incidents, regardless of how they're accepted. And we tried to follow those procedures. And we reported the incident as it occurred and have avoided any speculation on the subject.
There are cases that are not explainable in conventional terms.
That have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
Two very important questions to consider. Who are they? And what do they want? And an even more important question may be, where are they from?